past, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody joining today. I think we have a really good lineup of presentations, and I'm really excited for the content today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with an intro. I'm the only one here from the Columbus Tug that's on to lead the session, at least in the beginning. I think Aaron and Steve might join here in a little bit. We also are going to move things around a little bit differently from the agenda that you've seen. So we're actually going to have Chantilly up first, and she's going to talk about designing in Tableau, and I'm really excited for that presentation. After that, we're going to move over to Lee, and Lee is going to go through Persuading Quietly with dashboards. And then finally, we'll go through some Tableau new features with Colin from Tableau and talk about some of the new things that are coming up and have come with the product recently. So Chantilly, I think everybody probably knows you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You're 3-time Zen Master, specialty in data visualization design. Yeah, the CEO of MAD, and I mean, you do a lot of great things, and I'm sure you're going to introduce yourself a little bit. So I'll just go ahead and pass it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen and make sure that you all can see it. We good?
Got it.
All righty. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I am Chantilly Jaggernauth. I am the Vice President of Data Visualization and Training at Lovelytics. I'm also a 3-time Tableau Zen Master, a 4 or 5-time Tableau Public Ambassador, and I am the CEO and founder of Millennials in Data, a nonprofit educational organization. And today I have the pleasure of presenting to you all Design Secrets for a Non-Designer. And I like to call this one the business edition because during our last TC Live in Vegas a couple of years ago, I originally presented this and I tailored it towards my personal journey. But I found that these same tips and tricks that I'm going to share with you all today are things that you can use from the business standpoint as well. So I always start this presentation by saying that I do not consider myself a designer. And the reason being is because I first started using Tableau in 2010. And these were the very first charts that I ever created. I had an assignment that was due by my professor, and she said, just make sense of this data. And unfortunately, Excel kept crashing that night, and I was only, and I was struggling to like really do this assignment. And I ran into Tableau through a quick Google search. And these were the charts that I ended up creating after watching the YouTube video and downloading it. And as you can see, I didn't even take off the sheet 4 header that you see there. But I found that the tool was really intuitive. I spent many years working at Johnson & Johnson and Comcast and got to experience more of how a business uses Tableau. And I was able to create some of the dashboards that you see here today without having any graphic design experience. So the goal of today's session is to really show you how you can go from these basic starter visualizations that you see on the left-hand side to more, beautiful and captivating visualizations like you see on the right-hand side without having to have any graphic design experience. So my 5 design secrets. First, gathering requirements. That is typically the basis of any dashboarding project that we encounter. Sometimes there are more exploratory dashboarding projects, but this one is more so for those projects where your end users are giving you requirements and they're asking you to use Tableau and data to help answer those business questions. Second, we'll talk about creating a template. So how can we create templates that enable and aid our overall development process? Third, we'll talk about icons. We'll then talk about colors and how to pick colors strategically, and then we'll wrap it up with fonts. So gathering requirements. The first thing that you want to do whenever you're presenting with a new project is you want to make sure you understand the overall goal of the project. Now, I know this can seem really simple, but you want to make sure that you always keep this in mind, and that whenever you're presented with a project, even if it's like 3 months down the line since you began the project, that you always have your end user's end goal in mind. Next, you want to understand your audience's analytical maturity. By this, I mean, is your audience familiar with Tableau already? Is this an executive who is more familiar with PowerPoint and expecting to maybe export this dashboard to a PowerPoint? All of that you want to keep in mind because those dashboards that you'll be creating, they are for 2 different users, right? So if you have an analyst who uses Tableau on a very frequent basis, then you can have a really interactive Tableau dashboard versus like that executive, you might want to have something that's a little bit more static for them. You want to understand your end user's preferences. Are there particular colors that they want? Are there logos? Is this should this be sized for like a desktop device, a mobile device, a tablet? There have been many times where I've been in a project and we forgot this one simple step. and the client says, hey, I actually wanted this for a tablet, and lo and behold, I created it for a desktop. And Tableau is really great at allowing you to reformat things, but we do know that that can, increase the time that you have to spend on a dashboarding project. Next, you want to take your end users' preferences or their their business questions, and prioritize them. You want to have this conversation with your end user and figure out, all right, which ones are the most important questions, which ones are the least important questions. You want to ask them to rank them from highest to lowest. You want to ask them if these are things that they want to see as a chart, or is it better as a filter. You want to make sure that you have that conversation with your end user and refine and prioritize all of their business questions. You also want to do a high-level data discovery. So there are times where clients ask for things and they just don't have the data for it. And you're like, how am I supposed to, execute on this requirement if we don't have the data? So it's always super important that we do an analysis of the data. We try to see if there are things that we need to calculate, people that we need to reach out to get access to the data, because all of that is going to go in play in terms of how we use data to help answer these business questions that our clients have provided us with. And then last but not least, you want to start to determine the views that are going to be needed to answer the questions. If your end user says, I want to see trend over time, or I want to see sales over time, do they want to see that as a bar chart or a line chart or as a text table? I like to have those conversations with my end users as well, because you'll be surprised that end users typically have an end goal or end result or picture in mind of what they want this to be. And it's really up to us to try to get that out of them. So I always like to ask, how does this view work to answer that question? Do you want this as a standard number? Do you want to see, year over year type of trends, that type of stuff? So to help organize all of this, I've created a dashboard requirements document. On the left-hand side, we have information about the dashboard itself. We have the dashboard overview, the audience type, whether it's for an executive, a manager, an analyst, or for the public. We have the display mode, and you can get very specific with the type of device. We also have the different use cases. Is it going to be for a web? Maybe we can have a scrolling dashboard versus something that's for a PDF. We might want to size it 8.5 by 11 versus a PowerPoint. You want to create that one a little bit more rectangular. And any dashboarding filters or notes that we want to keep in mind. And then on the right-hand side, we have information about the view. So when I consider a view, what I consider a view is one worksheet, right? So if we're looking at sales over time, that's going to be one worksheet that is typically plotting sales per month. So what are the dimensions that we're going to need? What's the measures that we're going to need? Are there any calculations that I need to create this? Should I format it a certain way? Are there any filters that I should apply? Where should I get this data from? Those are the types of things that should go into your view requirements document on the right-hand side. Alrighty, so to illustrate how we will put this all together, let's look at this use case. The VP of sales wants to keep track of sales generated within the company. Overall, he or she wants to know how much each region brings in and which segment generates the most revenue for each region. Currently, this information is provided in an Excel workbook and shows sales per category, sales per segment, monthly sales, and the number of orders. Our goal is to create a new interactive dashboard that analyzes the company sales data that can be shared with regional leads as well as the VP of the sales team. Here are a couple of questions that we want this dashboard to answer. Which subcategories have the highest sales? What are the sales per region over time? What are the sales profit and profit ratio for each region? What are the sales per state? And which segment and region have the highest sales? So what I've done here on the left-hand side is I populated the dashboard requirements document based off of the high-level input from the VP. So we know that this is going to be for the VP as well as the managers. So our audience will be the executive as well as the managers. This kind of just lets me know that we can have an interactive dashboard, but it probably shouldn't be too interactive. It probably should not be an exploratory type of dashboard because it's for an executive and their managers. Then we have the display mode as a laptop. So we have 1100 by 1000. Our use case will be the web as well as the PDF. And then we've made some notes in terms of the filters that we should have on the dashboard, the colors. And then we've also noted here that there is an example that the VP has mentioned that they saw on Tableau Public. So that's something else that I like to do. I like to ask my end users, do they have an example in mind? Is there something that they came across that they really like? Because I'll take bits and pieces of that and incorporate it into their final dashboard. Then on the right-hand side, what I've done here is I've taken just one of those requirements, the metric details per region, and I've populated the view requirement document. So the main dimension that we're going to use is the region. Our primary measures will be customers, orders, sales, profit, and profit ratio. Calculations that we're going to need are for customers, orders, and profit ratio, and I've detailed exactly how to calculate them. I've noted the data source, and under the notes section, I placed here that the end user would like to see this as a text table. So from there, based off of all of the questions that the end user has provided, I've created a view requirement document for each of them. And now I have about 7 different requirements documents that outline exactly what needs to go into this dashboard. So from there, I go into Tableau and I bring in the data, but I do not start to build out worksheets. I actually start by creating a template. So the first thing that I do whenever I go into Tableau and I start with this template is I take those same requirements and I prioritize them. I'm making sure that I only use what's important. So if we go back to our use case, I've taken each of the requirements. I had the conversation with the VP of sales and I asked her, all right, can you order this from your most important requirement to your least important requirement? So the most important thing is that we want to see the overall number of customers, orders, sales, and profit. And then the least important thing is going to be our sales per subcategory. From there, I'm using text boxes in Tableau, pen or paper, some form of a wireframing tool to actually illustrate out this dashboard without having to incorporate the data within Tableau. So there are a couple of tools that I use: Tableau, Balsamiq, Figma, and Ninjamock. Tableau, you're using text boxes, you're adding context to it, and I'll show you a couple of examples. Balsamiq allows you to have more of a visual representation of what the dashboard will look like without having to incorporate data. Figma I use for more modern dashboards where I'm building out backgrounds and templates and then incorporating floating worksheets on top of them. And Ninjamock I personally do not use, but it's one that I know is also widely used, very similar to Balsamiq. So with a Tableau template, what we're doing here is we're creating the dashboard, but we're not creating any worksheets. We're taking text objects, placing it on the dashboard, and we're providing context for what should go in that text box. So as you can see here in the middle section, we're saying monthly sales per region, and this is going to be a line chart. Then we have the metric details per region, and this should be a text table. This just helps you illustrate and format your dashboard so you know exactly like how much space each of your worksheets are going to take up. A map is a worksheet that is going to need a good bit of space for you to be able to view it. So that's one of the benefits of creating this template so that I know exactly where I can fit this map without having to build the map first and then place it on the dashboard. And here's an example of a couple of Balsamiq wireframes. As I mentioned, it provides more of a visual representation of what the end goal of the dashboard is going to look like. Personally, a lot of the clients that we work with, we actually make sure that we build out these wireframes within Balsamiq first. Create the Tableau dashboards to represent the Balsamiq wireframe. It saves a ton of time and money within the consultant world. And then here's an example of a Figma template. What we're doing here is I'm actually creating these backgrounds within Figma, and then I'm importing them within Tableau as an image, and then placing the worksheets as floating objects on top of them. So once you have your template created, or while you're creating your template, you also want to make sure that you're designing to a grid. If you think about like newspapers and magazines and how things are laid out, everything is in like a column and grid-like format. So you want to make sure that you are also designing your dashboards in a column or a grid-like format, because it's just very easy for your end users to consume that information. So here, even though we have an odd number of charts, we're still designing to a 5-chart grid. If you look at the sales per state box, as well as the sales per subcategory box, the intersection of those two lines up perfectly with the 2 charts above it. And here's an example of a 4-chart grid, a 3-chart grid. While you're also building your template, think about bands and where you can place them. A band is a big aggregated number. You can substitute the A for whatever you please, but pretty much a band provides high-level information about a metric that is represented on your dashboard. Our entire dashboard is looking at regional sales, right? So at some point, the VP is going to want to know what's overall sales. And we know that if we have a chart that breaks out sales and we incorporate like a grand total bar, unfortunately, all of the bars above it will get skewed. So to get around that, I typically just like to provide bands and just add context. What's the overall sales? What's the overall profit? What's the overall number of orders? So that those types of questions are quickly answered in the beginning when your user first looks at a dashboard. So because a band is like an intro number to the detail of the dashboard, you want to make sure that you're placing your band either at the top or on the left side of the dashboard. Here's an example of your top band, and here's an example of a left-sided band. Your dashboard or your users are going to look at a dashboard top to bottom, left to right. So that's why you want to make sure that their eyes come across this band either at the top or on the left-hand side. And here are areas where you do not want to place your bands, on the right or on the bottom, because those are the last areas that your end users are going to look. While you're creating your template, be sure to use size and position to show hierarchy. So go back to your requirements that your end user gave you and start to lay out your dashboard based off of those requirements. Typically, the first thing that I do is I decide exactly where I want to incorporate my filters. When you're creating worksheets in Tableau and you're placing worksheets onto the dashboard, you're going to get a vertical filter pane on the right-hand side. Now, I personally think that it takes up too much real estate. So what I try to do is I try to incorporate my filters in the top right corner as a dropdown or right underneath the dashboard title and right above the bands, so that we're limiting the number of filters that the user will have on the dashboard. And we're also using the minimal amount of real estate for those filters. From there, I go back to the requirements and I lay out my charts based off of the requirements. So your most important information should always be in your top left and your least important information should always be in your bottom right. And last but not least, start to think about, icons and colors when you're creating your template as well. Typically, I like to place icons within the band area of my dashboard. And we're going to go into details on why icons are important and how to select them and place them. What you do not want to do is place icons everywhere on your dashboard, because icons are meant to add a bit of visual appeal and not really distract. So here, I'm just noting that I'm going to place icons next to each of the band numbers, versus here, you're placing icons next to each of your worksheets, and that is a little too complicated. And once you have your template, go ahead and fill in your template. So here we've created the template that you see on the left-hand side, and I went ahead and filled it in with the worksheets on the right-hand side. So I built out all of these worksheets, and it was super easy to take these worksheets and replace the text boxes that were once in the template. Here's an example of another Tableau template that I created for an employee turnover dashboard. I built out all of the worksheets and went ahead and placed each of those worksheets within the text boxes. Here's an example of a balsamic wireframe. Looks very similar to what I created on the left-hand side, the final Tableau dashboard. And what's unique about this particular balsamic wireframe is that I actually built this one that you see on the left, and I gave the wireframe to another consultant within our organization, and she ended up using this wireframe to produce the visualization that you see on the right-hand side. Our template guidelines. And last but not least, reuse your template all of the time. Especially if you work within a large organization, I always say that you should have a set of templates that your users are most familiar with. Here we have a Lovalytics template that we use internally. And as you can see, we have the same template that we're using for an HR use case, as well as a sales use case. This helps your users, this helps familiarize your users with exactly where they can find things at within your Tableau dashboard, especially like new users. If they see a template over and over again, or the same layout over and over again, they're gonna know, all right, I'm gonna find the refresh date on the left-hand side. I'll find the filters on the left-hand side. I'll find information about the bands at the top, and then I'll have a layout of the chart. So it helps your users adopt to this new tool, especially if Tableau is like new to your organization. So layout, fill in, and reuse. Using art to your advantage. So using simple images and icons can take your dashboard from basic to visually appealing. So the first thing that you want to do when you're selecting icons for your dashboard is you want to make sure that you're picking icons that communicate meaning and are easy to recognize. Typically, if you see a home icon on a dashboard, you're going to know that that's probably going to take you back to the home page. If you see an info icon, you'll know that it's going to help you learn more information. Or same thing with the data source icon. These are icons that already have meaning to them. They're not icons that your end users have to think about. Hey, what does that mean? So make sure when you're selecting icons, you do the same thing as well. In this example, we have 4 icons on the dashboard. We have, for our customers, we have a person icon. For our orders, we have a shipment or a box. For our sales, we have a sales tag that actually says sales. And for our profit, we also have a money bag. These are things that your end user doesn't really have to think about. Next, if your end user has to have an interaction with a logo or an icon, you want to make sure that you're providing that context, whether it's actually just writing it out or having like a tooltip within that area. So if you want your end user to click on the home button and go to the home page, make sure you actually say that, click to return to home page, or have it in the tooltip. If you want them to hover, make sure you say that as well. In this example, our icons that we have here are associated with our bands. So we don't really have to provide additional context for these particular icons because they're already associated with our bands, and our band labels provide that context. However, you did not know that you could click on the Tableau conference logo in the top right corner and go to the home page. So you want to make sure that you tell your end user to click to go to home page, or have a mouse over so that when they mouse within that area, it says click to go to home page. Never assume that your end user knows how to interact with the dashboard that you built. Next, when you're picking icons, make sure that they're simple, nothing too creative. Simple house is okay. You don't have to have a house that has like windows and doors and 2 stories, because the smaller those icons are, the harder they are to see. So in this example, we have a simple person, a simple box, a simple sales tag, simple money bag, versus in this example, we have icons that have a lot of details associated with them. We got a guy with a bun, a smiley face, and a beard. We got a very detailed box. These are really hard to see, especially if you're like on a mobile device and these get any smaller, they're going to be super hard to see. So stick with simple icons. Make sure that if you have more than one icon within the same real estate area, that they all have the same look and feel to them. You want to go for either all solid icons or either all silhouette icons. If you look at the second layer here, you have that one data source icon that is different from the other 2. And that's going to stick out like a sore thumb, especially if those icons are grouped within the same area. So always make sure that your icons have the same consistency with them. As you can see here, all of these icons are within the band area. And what sticks out, that customer icon, right? It just looks different compared to the other ones. So for something like this, you want to make sure that if you have all silhouette icons, that they're all silhouette. You don't want to just have one solid and a bunch of silhouette icons. You also want to make sure that your icons follow your overall dashboard theme and color scheme. If your dashboard is purple and gray, keep your icons either purple or gray. If you have brand colors that are blue, green, or red, but your dashboard does not have blue, green, or red, you should not use icons that are blue, green, or red. Make sure that your icons go with the overall color scheme. In this example, the color palette for our client, the VP, has this blue, but we're not using that blue anywhere on the dashboard. So why would we have random blue icons on the dashboard, right? So make sure that your icons go with the overall color scheme. And then last but not least, pick icons that do not have a lot of graphic details associated with them. Graphic details are the lines and the curves that are associated with an icon. And this goes hand in hand with making sure that your icons aren't too creative. Anything that has a lot of graphic detail that's really small on the dashboard is going to look like a blur to your end user. So that's the reason that you want to pick really simple icons that do not have a lot of graphic details. In this example, we have icons that are all silhouette, but they have a lot of details. And if I make these icons any smaller on the dashboard, you wouldn't even be able to tell exactly what they are. So simple and not too many graphic details is always the way to go. And yes, you can use icons for business dashboards. I do this all of the time. Let's look at some examples. So in this example, what I want to call out here is that the icons that you see within the band area are green. The only reason that I thought it was acceptable to have green icons here is because I have the Lovelitics green and blue logo in the top right corner. If I did not have that logo there, I probably would not have green icons within the band area because I don't have green anywhere else on the dashboard. In this example, I have a lot of icons within my export button section as well as within my bands. But for every real estate area that's on the dashboard, those icons have the same look and feel. You see within the band area, each of these have circles behind them. There isn't just one that randomly doesn't have a circle. So you want to go for consistency with your icons that are in the same real estate area. In this example, what I'll point out is that there are 3 different real estate areas. You have on the left-hand side this webinars panel that has the past and the upcoming webinars. We also have silhouettes for each of those icons, versus our band area that can be considered another real estate area, and all of those icons have the same look and feel. And if you look at our filter and export button area, all of those icons are in the same real estate area, so they have the same look and feel. So here's an example of a dashboard that has multiple real estate areas, but the key here is that if you have icons in those same real estate areas, that they should all have the same look and feel to them. And here's an example of a digital marketing dashboard. Have icons that go with the overall color scheme. Our band icons have the same look and feel versus our export and filter section, they all have the same look and feel. So where can you get icons from? My favorite site is flaticon.com. You can sign up for a free subscription and you're able to edit icons. The icons that you see within this screenshot here, those were not the original colors, but with a free subscription, you're able to edit those icons to follow the same look and feel of your dashboards. The Noun project is, I don't think it's free, maybe $99 a year, really great gallery as well. And the same thing with Icons 8. And these are our icon and art guidelines. All right, so now let's talk about colors and how to strategically select colors for your dashboards. So the first thing that you want to do when you're picking colors for your dashboard is you want to make sure that you're letting your brand colors form the basis. By the basis of the dashboard, I'm talking about your titles, your icons, your labels, those types of things. So you want to pick one dominant brand color. In this case, we picked the purple, and we're using that for the basis. Our headers, our icons, our large numbers, all of our worksheet titles, one color. Here's another example where I'm taking the Lovelytics blue and I'm using that for each of the title areas, the band areas, the section titles, the worksheet titles, and then I'm using the green for all of the icons. And here's another example for this website analysis dashboard. We're using that navy blue for all of the headers and the worksheet titles and the band area, and then the orange to highlight. Next, if you're stuck on where to, how to color or what to color, even how to lay out your dashboard, I always say you should just get inspiration from art and other visuals. I do this all of the time. My favorite go-to place is Tableau Public. So I had to create a stadium dashboard and I needed inspiration. So I simply just went to Tableau Public and I typed in a ticket sales dashboard and I came across the visualization that you see on the left, and I ended up taking bits and pieces of it and creating a visualization that you see on the right-hand side. I also like to scroll on Pinterest and another site called Dribble with 3 Bs instead of 2, because they have modern dashboards and I really like the look and feel of those modern dashboards. So here I came across this visualization you see on the left-hand side on Pinterest, and I like the layout of it. I really like the color scheme. So I took bits and pieces of that and I ended up creating a visualization that you see on the right-hand side. And here's another example. What was unique about this example was that I wanted to figure out a way to incorporate about 5 different dashboards into one workbook without it feeling as though the user was scrolling through different dashboards. I wanted to have a different user experience. So I came across the visualization you see on the left-hand side where user is able to select the tabs at the top and also have drill downs on the left-hand side as well. And I took that same experience and that layout and I created the visualization that you see on the right-hand side. Next, when you're selecting colors, you want to make sure that you limit the number of dominant colors. Try to use no more than 2 dominant colors on your dashboard. In this example, we have a color palette that has 5 different colors. 4 of them are dominant colors. Anything that isn't white or really light gray is considered a dominant color. So try to use no more than 2 of them. In this example, our main dominant color that we're using is purple and everything else is either gray or white. In this example, we have 2 dominant colors. We have both the blue as well as the orange. So we're using the blue for all of the headers and we're using the orange to highlight, and we're making sure we use that orange consistently throughout. And what you do not want to do is just have colors randomly splashed on your dashboard just because they're a part of your brand colors. Be very strategic with your color selection. I always say just use one dominant color and use it to highlight each of your worksheets and let everything else be white or gray. While you're creating your colors and you're picking your color schemes, make sure that you're picking accessible color schemes as well. Never assume that your end user can see the dashboard the same way that you can. So you always want to make sure that you're testing your color schemes once you've selected them. In this example, what I've done is I've taken this dashboard and I imported an image into color blindness simulator so that I can see how somebody with a color blindness deficiency might see this dashboard. The key here is that I want to make sure that they're able to see the highlights and the shades of purple on each of the worksheets and differentiate between like the lighter shades of gray. And as you can see, for somebody who is like blue blind and blue weak, yes, the color changes drastically, but you're still able to pinpoint the different tones and the different shadings and see where the darker shading is at. Here's another example. I wanted to make sure that with this dashboard, the end user was able to see the clusters on the map, as well as the highlighting that I have within this marginal histogram here. So what I did was I tested this color scheme as well. And even though it changes drastically for like red weak or red blind, because I use neutral colors for everything else, which is the white, the end user is still able to pick up on the colors that or the different shadings that I wanted them to see. And here's an example of what you do not want to do. You do not want to use that standard red and green color palette, because somebody who is like red blind isn't going to know if California is the highest or if it's the lowest. Also, use color purposefully and for reinforcement within your dashboard. So in this example, I'm using color purposefully. I'm only using the purple shading to highlight where necessary. On the line chart, I'm using it to highlight the spark point. On the highlight table, I'm using it to highlight the highest point. On the map, I'm using it to highlight the maximum or the highest state. I'm not using it on the sales per subcategory chart because it's already sorted descending, so there was no need to really highlight anything. So use color purposefully. Here I'm using it for reinforcement. I want to reinforce the top value of each chart, because when you get down to this bottom chart here, this isn't sorted descending, it's sorted alphabetically based off of the holding names. So now, because the end user is familiar with the blue bar being the maximum value, their eye is automatically drawn towards this maximum value bar, even though it's all the way at the bottom. And here's another example of using color purposefully. This is an investment comparison dashboard where I'm making sure that one ticker is blue and I'm keeping that blue consistent throughout, and another ticker is gray and I'm keeping that consistent throughout as well. So typically what I do is I actually design in Grayscale first. So everything is gray in my dashboard. And I'm going to show you how I do this on the next point. And then I use one dominant color and I highlight everything. So you'll always see a lot of my dashboards. They're either like blue and gray, orange or gray, green or gray, something like that. So let's talk about designing in Grayscale first and adding color to highlight. So I've taken away all of the color from this dashboard that you see here. So everything is gray, and believe it or not, this is actually what a lot of my dashboards look like when I first get started. From there, we're going to choose colors for our titles, our filter areas, and our band area. And remember, your dominant color, your brand dominant color is going to form the basis of your dashboard. So this is what that'll look like. Then from there, we're going to look at each chart individually, and we're going to ask that question: is there something that we want to highlight? You look at this line chart here, we have that spark point. We might want to draw a little bit more attention to it, so we'll highlight that. We have a text table here that has 5 different metrics. Do we want to highlight 5 different metrics? Probably not, so we'll leave color off of that. And then we have this table here that looks at segment and region, and we're just looking at sales. So we probably want to highlight there so that the user can easily see which segment and region has the highest sales. Then we look at our map. We have a lot of circles on that map, so we probably want to use color instead of the circles so that the end user can easily identify which state has the highest sales. And then the sales per subcategory. If you remember, this particular worksheet was the least important. So I'm actually just going to leave it a neutral gray because it's the least important thing. So we don't really want to draw that much attention to it. Then from there, we add some final touches by testing different worksheet title, colors, different shadings, borders, things like that. What I actually see a lot of users do when they're, at this point of the dashboard process is they do these really dark borders that you see here. And if you're a user that does that, I think you should probably stay away from it because it's going to draw attention away from the visualization. You can show sections without having really dominant, colors. You're adding more noise by having these really dominant borders and these really dominant shadings here. Try to go for a more neutral, light color so that the focus is on the visualization and not the section splits that you have here. And those are our color guidelines. Now let's wrap it up with fonts. So the first thing you want to do when you're picking fonts for your dashboard is you want to make sure that you're using one legible font. So there are times where I'm given a workbook and it has like 5 different fonts in it. The easiest way to get around this is to actually select format in the toolbar and select format workbook and choose one font for the entire workbook. When you're choosing that one font, make sure that font is a legible font. Here we have one font, but it's not very legible. So make sure you're picking a legible font. You also want to use no more than 4 sizes of that font type. Really, this just goes with like consistency for similar elements within your workbook. So typically I size my font sizes as a dashboard title. So if I have multiple dashboards within one workbook, all of the dashboard titles should have the same font size. All of my worksheet titles should have the same font size. One shouldn't be, the default 15 and another shouldn't be 11. All of the chart headers, which are your labels here where it says region, central, east, south, and west, those are your chart headers. Those should have the same size. And anything on your marks card, those should all have the same size as well. You also want to try to avoid custom fonts if possible. The reason being is because if you're using Tableau Online or Tableau Public, those fonts may not be available on the server. However, if you have an internal Tableau server, you should work with your admin to make sure that font is available on the server. Here are a list of the most compatible fonts for Tableau Online or Tableau Public. If you use a font that you downloaded on your computer and you use that in a dashboard and it's not available on the server, it's actually going to convert it to another font. So just keep that in mind. Be strategic with your fonts and your background colors as well. And this goes hand in hand with accessibility. Once again, remember your end users cannot see, they may not be able to see the dashboard the same way that you can. So here we're going to talk about contrast accessibility, right? This is when you have a colored background and you have colored font on top of that colored background. You want to make sure that there's enough contrast between those 2 colors so that your end users can see it. I like to use a tool called accessiblecolors.com that allows me to plug in the text color, the background color, and see if it meets the web content accessibility guidelines. If it does not pass, it provides me with a new background color or a new text color that I can change it to so that it does pass. Here are some examples. In this one, I'm using a navy blue background and I have the mustard yellow on top of it. So I want to make sure that for the smallest text that you see there, that the end user can see the difference between the mustard yellow as well as the dark blue background. So I plugged it in and as you can see, it passes. There's enough of a contrast between those 2 colors. However, if I were to darken that mustard yellow just a little bit, it would not pass. And the tool provides me with 2 different background colors or text colors that I can now change it to. Blues and grays are some of the hardest colors to see. So you definitely want to make sure you're testing if you have blue on a gray background. In this instance, it does pass. But if we were to lighten that background, it would not pass. And the tool, once again, provides me with different options. You also want to use color or bolding to emphasize any text that you want to draw your end user's eye to. If you have large bodies of text on your dashboard, try to bold the most important elements of that text. Never assume that your end user is going to read a paragraph that you have on your dashboard. So here, I'm bolding the year that the survey was taken for this dashboard, the number of participants, some key stats, so that the end user, as they're glossing over this paragraph, if they decide not to reach it, their eye is automatically drawn to those things. See the difference between not having the text highlighted and having the text highlighted? And last but not least, you always want to align left, especially if you have anything more than 3 sentences. You want to stay away from center and right alignment unless it's just for like design purposes, for maybe like a timeline or something. In this example, I have a paragraph on the dashboard. So you want to make sure that it's aligned left versus if I were to like center align this, you're going to force your end user to see where each of the line begins and ends. And it just adds more processing time for that paragraph. So always align left. And these are our font guidelines. So in summary, start with your audience and their requirements, build your template and add your views, incorporate design elements that will enhance your story, and add color strategically, icons for charm, and use the rule of 4 when selecting fonts. Anyone can be a designer. It's not something you're born with. It's not something exclusive to a select few. All it takes is practice while keeping a few design secrets in mind. Thank you so much. Here's my contact information. And if you would like to download the requirements document, it's available at designsecretsforanondesigner.com.
Awesome. That was great, Chantilly. I think we do have 5 or 10 minutes for questions, if that's good with you. And there's already a few in the Zoom if you want to take a look.
Yep. So let's see. Chantilly, thank you for your experience. This one is from Keith. It was a pleasure. I'm working on a view with large number of teams that I would like to differentiate potentially with color. However, it creates a jumble of colors without a true purpose. If you have a view that is separated into many teams, what advice would you give? So typically, this will go back to the requirements, Keith. If the goal is to have like a team look at this dashboard and see how they compare against like other teams, then you might want to use like a parameter that allows the team to highlight their specific team. So if I go to this dashboard and I just want to see how I compare to others, I probably don't need color for all of, for everybody else. I probably just want to see how I compare. So I would highlight my team. So that's probably something that I would do with a scenario like that. And then Jason, how would you distinguish different years in the time series line chart that has 3 distinct years worth of data? So for something like that, I would actually do 3 shades of the same color. So the most recent year would be the darkest color. The year before that would be a shade lighter of that same color. And then the year before that would be an even lighter color. So you're using the same color, you're just lighting it, creating like lighter tones for previous years.
Awesome. And we got a couple actually in the chat. So how did you format the dashboard tabs at the top so that they look nice, not just like tabs?
Those are navigation buttons in Tableau. It's one of the best features that they've added for dashboards. So you can now use the dashboard object, the navigation button, and you can format it like that.
Awesome. Anybody have any other questions for Chantilly before we let her go eat? We got one more, it looks like, in the chat. If I have a scenario where I am sheet swapping, say 5 sheets based on a parameter, if each of them have different filter needs, how would you recommend doing this?
I would probably put them into 5. This is a tough one. Maybe 5 different dashboards that make it seem as though like they're in the same dashboard swapping. But what you don't want is like a filter, like one filter to be there but not apply to the others. Maybe you just have something that tells your end user like which filters apply and which do not. Also, when you're doing sheet swapping, I believe if the sheet disappears and the filter only applied to that sheet, the filter also disappears as well. So you could have it collapsed also if it's in the same container.
Perfect. Okay, well, and we got a thank you from Nathan. So I think we're all set, Chantilly. I really appreciate your time. Great session, lots of useful stuff. And I know everybody appreciated it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So let's go ahead and move forward. So like I said, we've kind of switched things around a little bit. So Lee, are you all set and ready to go?
I am.
Awesome. All right. So Lee, what we're going to do is go ahead and pass it over to you. Really excited for your presentation, listening to how we're going to persuade without yelling. So I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself. I'm sure you've got that in your slides.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. And I think this was a good follow-up to what Chantilly was talking about, because one, I think we're in agreement on a lot of ideas, and 2, I'm not going to cover the same kind of material, but you'll see there's some relationships between the topic. which is really good because then you can take both of our ideas and hopefully begin to apply those to your work. So I'm going to just say hello here on video for the moment, and then I'm going to switch my video off just to make sure we have really good bandwidth and no hiccups that way. And let me share my screen. Here. All right.
We got it.
Good.
Oh, good, Lee.
All right. Success. Hopefully that's the hardest thing I have to do for the next 30 minutes or so. So Zach already went through a bit of introduction of what we're going to talk about. So I'll just jump right in and we'll get into some real detail here. One of the things that I want you to think about the most is that some of the things you may encounter in your work are not your fault. And I want to show you some of those specific areas, and I want you to have some ideas about how you can move past them, because you're probably similar to some of the things that I've experienced in my work in analytics and data visualization over the last 15 years or so, where you put a lot of your own work into something, you've thought about it a lot, there's a lot of mental energy, and you put it out to somebody to work with, and for some reason, although you've put your best effort forward, they're not getting the kind of insights that you had intended, and the engagement might be much lower than you had wanted. And we've all faced this. And you may wonder, well, why has this happened? I've put a lot of work into it. I followed the best practices, and you can get a little disappointed. And rather than just accepting that, I've studied, why does this happen? And looked for ways to advance my skills where I can work smarter and, of course, get better results. And so I'm going to share some of those things with you today. And the things I want to share with you are very practical, because I want you to be able to take them and do them, not just give you some theories about things that you should do or think about that might not be easy for you to implement. So I'll give you some tools to knock these problems down to size, and also that you can repeat these over and over again, because these are situations you're going to come across all the time in your work. And it doesn't matter if you're an advanced dashboard designer with Tableau, you're super with Excel, or maybe you're just starting out with Tableau Creator. The things I want to share with you will really save you time and help you have more impact. I'm going to share 3 ideas that might start changing the way you think about data visualization. That might sound a little bit dramatic, but I've been working with clients on these ideas for many years, and I've seen it help them. So I think it can help you. More importantly than just, of course, helping them in their work, I've seen it help their careers, because it's really the more impact you can have with your work, people are going to recognize that and give you the ability to progress. And that's really an important aspect of this. So here I am over here. And I'm sharing this with you because it's something I'm really proud of. One of my kids, my daughter, attends James Madison University, and last year I volunteered to help them overhaul their COVID dashboard. The reason I'm bringing this up isn't as much to tell you about my personal life, is that they had a lot of data, right? COVID has just created this enormous amount of information people have had to deal with. And they put it out on a dashboard in Tableau, but what they didn't really think about is, what do we want to communicate through this? Their audience, right, is a mix of people from state government to parents of students to faculty and so on. And and what did they want to say? What was most important about what was going on? And they didn't do that. They just took a bunch of data and made a bunch of charts. And that's what I want to emphasize and go over with you today is how do you focus more on the ideas, get those across in a very simple and consistent way. And so I run a company called Decision Viz. The company's just me, and I love it that way. And what we really focus on is helping our clients build what we call an army of trustworthy decision makers. That's really the goal of working with data, is to help people figure out what decisions they want to make and what actions they want to take. And over the last 12 years that I've been using Tableau, and I really love Tableau, so I'll just tell you a few of the things that I've been involved with in case any of them are of particular interest to you. I'm always happy to talk about these areas. So back in 2009, when I started working with Tableau, the company I was with, we became their largest worldwide customer. So obviously that's some time ago. In 2012, I started Decision Viz, and I'm a Tableau partner. And from 2010 to 2018, I ran 2 Tableau user groups, one in New York and one in New Jersey. And from 2016 to 2020, I was a Tableau ambassador, and I teach Tableau at New York University. Now, I've said all that, but being successful with data visualization requires more than just being good technically at Tableau, right? There's so much more to do that. And those are some of the tips I'm going to give you here. So here are the 3 ideas I mentioned that I want you to be able to take away with you and really challenge your thinking about working with any type of software when it comes to building dashboards. So the first one is that visualization is a language that you have to learn. There are rules, guidelines, there's strategies, just like with any other language. And if you practice, you can get really good at that language. And within that language, I'm going to specifically talk about color. And Chantilly brought up a little bit about color. We're going to dive into a different aspect of it. And color has the ability to clarify, but it also has the ability to confuse. And some of you may have come across cases like that. So we'll jump into a couple of case studies and discuss a technique that can help you transform a poor use of color into one where color is really delivering a clear message. And the third part is that creating dashboards is really about helping to conduct an analysis and answer questions. Yet what I see most often is that dashboards are set up in a way that goes against how the audience is thinking they will consume the information and how their minds are prepared to consume that information. That'll be the third part that we get into. So let me share an analogy when I say visualization is a language, and it's more about than just knowing the features and functions of software, whether it be Tableau, PowerPoint, Excel, Power BI, et cetera. I'm sure most everybody here is using Tableau for the most part, since we're at a Tableau user group. So imagine that your company wants you to be good at writing, say in English. So they train you on every feature and function of Microsoft Word. You know everything there is to know, except they don't actually teach you the language. So in this case, we'll say again, English. They don't teach you how to construct a sentence, and they don't teach you how to put a story together. Again, but you're great at the software. So maybe you come up with something like this. It's kind of confusing. Now, I'm sure most of you figured out it's this very simple phrase, which is pretty commonly used, right? The reason you were able to write it that way is because you actually maybe understand the language a little bit more than just putting a bunch of words together in some order that don't make sense. But if you think about it, this has what's happened to probably many of you, where your company invests the time and money to train you on Tableau, or maybe you just did it on your own. And you've become great at using the software, but never really got that training on the language of visualization, certainly not on storytelling, or probably an area you may have heard of called data literacy, which is kind of encompasses a lot of these ideas. So in the end, it doesn't really matter how many buttons you end up clicking in the software, how great you maybe make it look, maybe even follow the best practices of how do you use color or make a visual. What ends up happening is that the visualizations you create really don't hold up when it comes time to actually using them, which is making decisions and taking action. Now, here's the strange thing, or what I always consider the strange thing, is that for some reason, management has decided to go and use this software in the company, which is a great decision, but then they had just assumed that the software just magically helps you write a good visual story that are going to create that kind of engagement with your audience and ultimately persuade them to take the actions. And I think many of you probably know that that's a bad assumption. We've seen that unless we really know how to do things more properly, put a story together, organize our thoughts in a better way, that just making a great looking chart isn't nearly enough to move things along. And so, of course, we're missing big opportunities, right? Which is the reason the companies are making big investments in this area. So let's dive into a couple of case studies that are going to take a look at some of the problems here. And the first one is, I just want to give you a little bit of background about your brain and what that has to do with visual language. Since you're all working with Tableau, I'm sure you understand and have heard, of course, that the brain has the ability to recognize complex patterns. And this happens literally in the blink of an eye. So I want to give you a little kind of corollary to this idea. So your brain is working on an image as soon as it sees it. So in a way, you're thinking about what it means before using effort to think about it. I'll let that sink in for a second. What does that mean? When images don't show information in a way that correctly communicates the message, or the image is confusing, it slows your audience down. It takes them longer to decipher the meaning behind it. And when that happens, they may be inclined to just ignore it and move on to something else. Now, that's the worst thing that can happen for folks like us, whose job is to help people understand the information. Now, if we can help harness the brain's natural processing power, then we can help our readers move through large amounts of information and start getting to figuring out what decisions they should make and what actions they should take. So when I talk about patterns and what's going on in someone's head, what are those patterns? Well, there are many patterns, but I want to introduce you to what I consider the 5 most commonly used patterns in a data visualization. And I'm sure these things are going to look familiar to you, but maybe you don't think about them as patterns, but your brain certainly does. So there's location, there's size, gradient, which sometimes you may hear called color intensity. There's color, which is different than gradient. It's called color hue, and shape. Now, of course, your brain isn't just looking for each of these patterns by itself. It also knows how to handle these patterns when you combine them, right? Which happens often in a visualization. So the key here is when you understand how your audience's brain is interpreting each of these traits, you're not just going to be clicking in the software anymore and saying, well, I want to use size or I want to use color. you're going to really be applying the fact that you know how they're going to work and how someone is going to absorb them, or that person's brain is going to try to absorb them in making a better choice. And in particular, a choice that is going to help get your message across more clearly. Now, for something like Tableau, you've probably found the software pretty easy to use. And I would argue that maybe that's not necessarily a good thing. I know that may sound a little bit strange. So let me tell you what I'm talking about here. Because when you're using the software and you're just clicking, what's happening is you're really treating each of these 5 traits equally. You're like, I can click here and make size. I can click here and make a gradient, right? The thing is that these traits are actually not equal. Some are easier for the brain to process, and this is critical to making your choices. So in fact, what I call this is a hierarchy, that some are easier to process than others. Now, it's not the technical hierarchy like we know in Tableau. So here's an example. So depending again on what you are trying to communicate through your visual, you would try to choose size before gradients because size is easier for the brain to use. Or you might try to use color before you use shape because shapes are harder for the brain to process. And what happens is when you go against the hierarchy by using visuals, these traits in the wrong way, it's actually causing your reader, your audience, to work harder to understand the visual, which of course is not a good thing, right? Our goal as the author, as the designer, is to make it as easy as possible for the audience to understand what's going on and interpret it correctly, right? Now, I showed you that there are these 5 traits. And again, I'm sure you have come across many other ones, but I'm going to focus on color and gradients in particular, because these are the most used, but they're also the most abused. And because of that, I want to make sure to give you some practical tips on how to handle these. So we'll look at a couple of case studies, see where these don't follow the hierarchy, and then how to build these in a way that make them more engaging and easy to understand. So when I talk about abuse of color or gradients, here's what I'm really meaning. One, you're just using too many. And when you do that, nothing stands out, which means it's hard to know what's really important. And the real reason to use a color or gradient is to help something stand out, not necessarily to make something look pretty. When you use a color or gradient to represent more than one thing, it starts to mess with your brain, because now you're looking at it and you see the same colors or gradients and you think they are related, but they're not necessarily related. We'll see what that means. And the third is just using it when it's not needed, because your audience looks at it, they think there's a meaning behind it and that it's important, but really you don't, you're just using it to add some pop, make it look cool. So that's going to, again, slow the audience down. Now, there's many other violations I could list. I'm sure you know a lot of other ones that maybe we would talk about today, but we just don't have time. So we'll go through some practical tips on these. So here's a dashboard that I found out, I think on the Tableau website. And this author happens to like orange gradients quite a bit. You can see they're used in many different places of this particular dashboard. One thing you may have thought about is, well, there's no color legend, so I don't even know what these mean. There's all this green, we've got different color greens here, we've got a gray background, and then even this pie chart is using some of the same oranges and greens and that complicates it even more. So again, the goal of color is to help your message stand out. So the more color we use, it just gets harder and harder to understand that. I pointed out that this uses a gray background. I recommend using a white background so that you can use grays in your visuals when you need them. So first thing I did is when I saw this is, well, let me just go and check what the color legends are, because maybe it is lined up correctly and the gradients are representing the same information, but they're not. Actually, you can see that while they represent the same measure, amount expended, all the ranges of the gradient are different. So if you look at a light orange or a dark orange, they don't correspond. So you might immediately jump to a conclusion that, oh, well, those pieces of information are the same when they're not. So you really can get thrown off track very quickly and start thinking about this in completely wrong way. And then again, some of those same oranges are used in the pie chart and they have a completely different meaning. So this one really has some bad actors in it and not following even some basic best practices. So let's talk about how the hierarchy can start helping you out, how to get rid of some of these gradients or colors that are here. And this is a rule you can follow in general when you work through the hierarchy, but we're going to, again, just stick with colors. So I want to use the pie chart as an example here. So a pie chart is really a combination of different traits. It's size for the size of the slices, and it's using color to distinguish the slices. And then it's also using labels, which isn't necessarily a trait, but that's also helping to point out what the data is, right? We're using the label and then we're showing the actual value. This is actually quite a lot for the brain to soak in when you think about it. It has to look at a lot of different pieces of information, understand what each one is, and understand the relationships. So here's a key fact to that will really help you if you start to look at any of your visualizations, and especially around color, and want to simplify them. But you can use this hierarchy I'm showing you here. When you want to simplify a visual, you have to look at it and start with the removing what is the hardest trait on there. So if we take the pie chart, the hardest trait in this case is going to be color. We're also using size, but size, you can see, is easier for the brain to interpret. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we get rid of color and make the pie chart easier? Well, if we just got rid of the color, we're going to end up with something like this, which now it's not as easy to tell the different slices in the pie chart from each other. Of course, we've got these lines for the border, but again, the color was really there to help us distinguish them. So we have to think, well, instead of using size for the slices, what if I use size in a different way? Well, we could use size in terms of a bar chart. And now this is a huge improvement right away because we've got things sorted numerically. It's very clear what the values are, and we can see how they're ordered as well. And we're really just using the bar as one trait instead of all this other information. One other thing I want to point out about this that also can make your visuals complicated, which doesn't necessarily have to do with the hierarchy itself, is showing too much information. So in this case, they've taken a number that's 191 million and taken it on the pie chart all the way out to the single digits. And if you think about this from making a decision or just trying to understand what's basically going on, you don't need the number to be 9 digits long. You can just show it with 1 decimal point. I'm not even sure you need the decimal point, but I just did it here to make that point. And if you think about labels, that's really another piece of information that your audience has to soak in. So when you have this going out to 9 digits, it's just more confusing. It's something else extra they have to look at that's really not necessary. So I really hope you keep that in mind because this is a very common thing that you see. So let's dig into the other parts of this particular dashboard and see how we can simplify them. Now, one part of the dashboard that tends to not get much love is the title. And here it just says city spending. What you usually get is the logo and a vague description on the title. And when you think about it, the title should really set the reader's expectations for what's they're going to experience on the remainder of the dashboard. And something like city spending could have a lot of different meanings depending on the audience, right? So we would love to make that a lot clearer. So anything you can do to make it more specific and detailed will really help tune the reader into your message. That's your job, right? Because you've created this to communicate, and you want to make that as easy as possible. When I looked this over, studied the whole dashboard, what hit me is that, and this is not that hard to figure out, that they're trying to show spending for 1 year at a time. So I thought, well, that should really be part of the title. And when I combined it with some other things, we start to look at this and see that there's other information on the dashboard, which is actually used to change the year. So I got the idea that I could combine this into one clearer and simpler heading that looks like this. So I've made sure that they know it's total spending, and just actually, instead of having that filter as a separate piece, I just put that right into the title. So they can select it from there. And then all that space that they used for showing the amount of the spending in that big text area, I just put it right in the title. So now it's all very clear. So these kinds of things you'll get better at the more you do them, but this is one nice little way to condense a lot of information. One thing that you may have heard is that people will start reading a dashboard from top to bottom or left to right. So we definitely want to take advantage of that. So in this case, the first chart that they are going to see is this one, because we just removed the other one. And because of that, I thought that that would be a good spot to use the gradient, because then we can really make the information stand out. Now, this table happens to be sorted alphabetically, but if you're going to use a gradient, it's kind of confusing to the eye to see things all over the place. And also, this chart you can see is scrolling, so you really don't know where the highest values are. So I thought it'd be better, just again, this comes with experience, to show where the highest values are. And here's what the new chart looks like. Also, because I have more space above it physically, I was able to expand this area for this particular chart, and now it doesn't even need to scroll. So this is a lot better, not only from a design standpoint, but from an analytics standpoint and a user experience standpoint. I don't have to scroll. I can see all the values. I can see the full range of values on here. It's a huge improvement. The next thing is our pie chart, which we already dealt with, which is great. One other reason that I try to stay away from pie charts versus just making it easier to understand the data is they tend to take up a lot of space because you've got the labels sticking out of the slices. They're a little harder to control from a real estate standpoint than some of the other charts that you might use. So here again, you can see we've condensed the information into a much smaller area, which gives us more space to do with some of the other charts that we need. So here's a third chart that's using the gradients, and it seems that they're trying to probably show some kind of trend here because we're looking over time, and trends tend to be better with a line chart. Most of you, or many of you, probably know that. So if we just convert this to a line chart, we're also not going to need the gradient, and it simplifies it a little bit more. And now we're down to these last two charts that have gradients. They're sorted in different ways. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not good practice to use a gradient again, especially if it's got a different range, which we saw it did when we looked at the legends. So I just simplified these down to a bar chart each. We got rid of the gradient. So you can see we've done quite a bit of work here to take the same data, remove a lot of the color and gradients, and simplify it down. And it's all done in the same amount of physical space, which is really good as well. There's one more step that I want to take you through that will really help you improve your dashboard. So we already talked about this idea that a dashboard title should really be a single unifying idea. And the same way, each visual should also have a single idea that draws the reader in. So each visual, right, has to be part of the whole analysis, and you want it to be clear what role it plays in that. So here's that contradiction I mentioned in the beginning. So what does a dashboard author do? Well, the user, the reader, is thinking about questions. I'm going to read this dashboard because I have certain questions in mind. However, what happens is many times the author doesn't write in terms of questions, they write in terms of statements. And that's what we see here. Things like money spent by department, money by spending category, etc. Okay. So instead of that, because the reader is thinking in terms of questions, we should write to them in terms of questions. And this is going to not only draw them in because that's how they're thinking, it's going to have that higher engagement because of we're creating that alignment with the way their brains are attacking this. So instead of money spent by department, we can just say, how much did each department spend? It has the same meaning, yes, but one, this is super clear, and it has that tuning in to your audience. I think you all would agree that questions create a curiosity. It makes you interested. It makes you want to examine the data. It brings you in, right? I want to answer this question, whereas a statement is just there and then you kind of pass on over it. Just for example, let's do one more here. So instead of money spent by month on the line chart, now we've got what is the monthly spending trend. It's very specific and it's connected to what the reader is thinking. I really urge you to consider this idea and re-examine your work to see if you can adopt some of this. Let's do one more example and then we'll close out to some Q&A. So here's another one where there's lots of color, there's some gradients, and it's highly repetitive. Okay, across 4 on the same dashboard. And these are completely different sets of information where they're using the same color. So the last one we saw, they were gradients, we weren't sure. Here, it just really jumps out that there's something going on that is probably not a good idea for us to go with. The thing that's going to happen here is someone's going to see a purple or a light blue, and the brain is going to try to make connections because those colors are the same. It's just how your mind works, even before you start thinking about it in a serious way, as I said before. And that's going to create confusion when you don't really need it to be confusing. And that's how powerful colors are, but you really have to be very purposeful with how you use them. And if I had to guess, I think what was going on here is they just wanted to make it look cool because you also are using 4 different chart types. You've got tree maps and bubble charts. And I really urge you to remember that the goal is not for the dashboard to look cool. the goal is to effectively communicate a message. So the pie chart's real simple here, right? We know how to deal with that pretty much the same way we did before. So we can just turn that into a simple bar chart with using a gray. The bar chart in the top right is using two blues, which feels more like a gradient. And gradients can really only be used for measures. But in this case, the terms downstream and upstream are really dimensions. So it's not really a proper way to use something that feels like a gradient. It's better to use two unique colors. So I'll just choose a blue and a red here. A bubble chart in the lower left is very much like a pie chart. Instead of the size being on slices, size is used for bubbles. So we can apply the same concepts here, and we'll just make that a bar chart. The last one is really interesting. We've got this tree map, and the tree map is actually for geographic information. So to me, it seems like, why not just make it into a map? People are going to recognize that very quickly, of course, rather than looking at the tree map and then saying, oh, I see that that's for geographic information. So here's the application of a few simple ideas, but let's go through this and talk about some of the specifics. Of course, you're going to get better at this the more you practice and apply some of these ideas. This version is using color to highlight very specific data. And remember, when I say color, it's really two different things, as I showed you when we looked at the 5 traits. One is the idea of a gradient. And a gradient, you know, is either measures of a single color or multiple colors, and you use a measure. A color is actually unique single colors, and each of them represent the value of a dimension. So you have to be careful, because Tableau and other software, but Tableau for sure, lets you use these incorrectly. You can put dimensions onto a gradient and it will do things, right? And that's not the proper way to use it. So when you do that, even though technically it's possible, it can really confuse your audience because they're not expecting to see the pattern that way. And when you try to do things just to make it look pretty, like I expect was happening here, that's when the trouble really happens. Again, try to use something like a neutral gray. It's nice and light when you don't really need the data to stand out. So let's finish this off, because you may have noticed that the original dashboard didn't even have a title. So not only a vague title, it had nothing. And that's something that we really need to look at. So I just took this one, which was really clear. What are the profiles? And this came from a particular study, which happened to only be a small footnote on the original dashboard. So if we bring it out front and center, it's going to be very clear what we're talking about. And let's take a couple of examples again of the titles, because we want those to align well. So if we take respondents by revenue and just say, what is the revenue distribution? That's clear, it's specific, it draws us in. We know it's some kind of spread of information. And then on the map, instead of saying respondents by regional cluster, which is kind of a little bit vague and kind of boring and unexciting, you know, at least if we say where are executives located, we get a sense of you know, what are we trying to get at. So just be specific and keep it simple. You don't have to have a long, complicated explanation of what this is. So just to wrap this up, we've got the 5 traits hierarchy, which is this idea that there's an order of how the brain likes to process information from easy to hard. And when you don't go in this order or go against this order in an unnecessary way, it can be confusing. Make sure that you use color to focus attention. Don't use colors that might be conflicting to the user because the same color can be interpreted as having the same meaning. And then last, use questions to really draw your reader in, to create engagement and to tune in to how they're already thinking about it. Remember, they're there to answer questions. So if you just hit them in the same way, it's going to create a much better relationship and a higher level of engagement with them. Some of these ideas I told you about the idea of creating questions. I actually have a small ebook which you can download. I'll actually just throw this link into the chat here so that it's easier for you to get at it. What I want you to do is take this as a starting point because it'll really give you some initial ideas. Oops, wrong thing. On how to get started with this, because sometimes it can be a little hard to begin that process. So this is really a good way to take some befores and afters and apply them in some pretty common situations to what you might be running across in your work. If you want to get in touch with me, there's a whole bunch of ways. You can check out my YouTube channel where I do interviews every couple of weeks with folks like Elisa Fink, who was the former chief marketing officer of Tableau, and other folks who are very involved with the data visualization and analytics community. You can really learn a lot from hearing what these folks have to say. And of course, you can get me on email and all the social media channels, etc. So thanks a lot. Hopefully you've got some questions we can dive into. Zach, I don't know if you want to throw any of those out, if you've got anything.
Yeah, so everybody, if you have some questions, we can go ahead and throw them here into the QA. Give it a minute. That was really great, Lee. Lots of great content. I'm sure everybody's excited after both of the last presentations to just jump in and do some dashboarding.
I hope so.
Maybe, yep, we've got 2 questions for you if you want to jump in there from David.
Yep, I see that. So the visual hierarchy concept, which ones does the brain process fastest? Yeah, so the order that they come in. So in this case, it's location would be the simplest. And really location is exactly what it sounds like. It's where are things related to others. The simplest version of this is something like an XY plot or a map, right? Because map, we know how things are positioned. And then when you get into things like clustering, where things are, or outliers, right? You can see a group of things are in one spot, and then there's a few things in other spots. That's the idea of location. And that's another reason why maps are so easy for people to use, because it really is like an XY plot. Longitude and latitude, and a picture is just behind it. That's why you don't really have to teach people how to read a map other than what the countries are. That's a part that you do have to teach them. And there was another question: is there a source you can share for it? Oh, I was just looking for the source that you used. Lots of research. There was not one source. Talking to people in the industry, there's a lot of books about this. One book is called, it's a really old one. It's called The Semiology of Graphics. I'll just type it into the chat. It is not an easy read, but there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. It's pretty old, but you can find it out on Amazon, and it has tons and tons of information and studies that have been done about visual perception, if you really want to dig in. I see I see a question here about the Tableau data analyst exam. And someone else said they will answer the question. I'm not sure who Eric is, but fire away, Eric.
It's Aaron. So
Aaron, sorry.
no worries. That is a great question for Colin during our next segment. So we're gonna table that until Colin gives his little presentation.
Great. Yeah, I know that that's a new one, and I'm not going to jump in and try on that one. But yeah, I definitely say if I can just encourage any folks again out there in terms of your career, when it comes to thing like taking any of the certification exams. I know clients that I've worked with, it's really been a big help to them from a career standpoint to get those certification. It really opens up a lot of opportunities, and it also forces you to learn things that you probably wouldn't just learn on a day-to-day basis as well, just kind of doing the things that you would normally go about. So definitely look into that one or any of the other ones that are out there.
Awesome. Well, I think we're good. Lee, thanks again.
Thank you.
For presentation. Everybody, Lee's information is there if you want to grab yourself a screenshot. And I guess we're going to go ahead and pass it to Colin. Aaron, you want to intro Colin?
Sure. So Colin is a engineer with Tableau, now known as Salesforce. So he's going to be covering over new features of the previous and upcoming releases, as well as some need to knows about Tableau Conference 21.
Cool. Thank you. Let me share my screen here real quick. And if it's okay, I'll actually start with that before I do my formal introduction and presentation here. So yeah, I wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. So Tableau Conference 2021 registration is now live. So you can go to this link here. I will post it in the chat here if I can. Let me do Q&A here, I think. Yep. Maybe I'll get it afterwards here. Now that I'm sharing my screen, it doesn't look like I can do that easily, or I'm just not able to figure it out. But the dates for this are going to be November 9th through the 11th. So this is 100% free. We are going to have content from noon Eastern to 6 p.m. Eastern. Going to be, I think, very similar to what you all experienced last year if you were able to attend that. To be honest, a lot of the details still are in the works and content and things like that. To be totally honest, I think at one point during the summer, there was some hope that this could be potentially in person or maybe have small group gatherings, and I still think some of that's being worked out. But check out tableau.com/events.conference. Go ahead and register for that. So as you can sign up for things as those become available, if you have registered, you'll be sure to be on that communication and be able to do that. If you scroll down to the bottom, I like to go to this FAQ section here. If you want to get an idea of what is going to be there at Tableau Conference, one of the things I just want to call out here is the Tableau Doctor piece. So I actually was a part of, I actually saw a Tableau Doctor at one point. I was a customer of Tableau's, and it was a really great experience. And then once I started working for Tableau, I was on the other side as a doctor. But this is a great opportunity to get some one-on-one help with really any topic that you can possibly think of related to Tableau. I mean, if it's getting started with Tableau, if you are a leader and you want to understand more about data culture, there's all sorts of things that you can ask about, and it's all, again, completely free. I believe there will be communication that is emailed out, and you can actually register and sign up for a session there. So just wanted to make all of you aware of that before I get going here. So what am I going to be talking about today? So I'm going to go through some new features in Tableau Desktop, starting with 2020.4 and onward. Obviously, there's a lot of features that have come out with all of these major releases. I'm not going to touch on all of those. That would take quite a bit of time, but I'll point you here in just a second to some of those resources. As far as myself, so yeah, I am Colin Thornburg. Everyone calls me Colin, so no worries, Zach and Aaron. I get that 99% of the time. If someone actually does pronounce my name correctly the first time, it just completely shocks me, and I typically left speechless. So yeah, Colin Thornburg. So been with Tableau now for, geez, I guess almost 2 years. And prior to joining Tableau, I was actually in probably most of your shoes. I was a customer of Tableau's for a number of years. So never thought I would be in a position to work for Tableau, but here I am, and I've really enjoyed my experience. Fortunately, I got in right before all of COVID hit, so got to meet a lot of my coworkers in person before we went fully remote here. But what do I do? What do I like to do outside of work? So I live here in Indianapolis with my wife and 3 kids. We also have a little pug, so they keep me pretty busy. Outside of work, really like to just stay active. So I was a runner for a long time, dabbled in some triathlon stuff, and then I recently got my son into karate. So I figured if he's going to do something like that, I've always wanted to do some martial arts. So for about the past, I don't know, 6 or so months, I got into some martial arts, doing jujitsu and Muay Thai, and it's been just a really good experience. It's kind of one of those people that, it's one of those things I always wanted to do and just kept delaying it. So if you're like me and you've thought about doing something like that, I'm a little bit older. I'm in my mid 30s. Never thought I could start something physical new at this point, but I'd really encourage you, if you're thinking about doing something like that, to do it, because it was really a great experience. So okay, so let's get into the actual presentation here. Desktop features specifically. So I have, just in general, thinking about new releases, like where do I go? So certainly, working with Tableau, we've got our own internal resources that are excellent. But honestly, the public resources are pretty much just as good, especially, as you all know, with how vibrant the community is. It's amazing. So one of the hidden resources that I find valuable is this previous release rundown. So it's typically pretty easy to find those features that are released in our newest release. We just dropped 21.3 today. If you Google that, you'll be taken right there. But if you want to know, when was a feature released, in the past, this link here will take you to that spot. So yeah, if you look down here, you can actually see, by version 21.2, and you can just click on the little caret here, and it will show you all of those features specifically. And my other favorite resource is from Tableau Tim. For anyone on this call, I would suggest going to YouTube either now or shortly after this presentation. Subscribe to Tableau Tim's YouTube page. He is amazing. I can almost guarantee you right now he is doing some deep dives on 21.3, and actually, just as I'm talking about that, it looks like he might have dropped some new videos here, but he is excellent. I mean, within days of us dropping a major release, he's got tutorials on almost everything. So he's fantastic. So when you get a minute, go to YouTube, subscribe to Tableau Tim, and you will not be disappointed. He's got a lot of other good content outside of just new releases, but yeah, just an excellent resource here. So let's jump back a little bit, and let's cover a couple of my favorite desktop features released in version 2020.4. So we'll cover predictive models, extended date range, which really kind of go hand in hand here, and map layers. So when you think about Tableau, like what is kind of their bread and butter? What are the main use cases? What type of analytics is Tableau used for? And a lot of people use Tableau mainly for descriptive, diagnostic type analytics, and it's incredibly powerful at doing that, finding insights in your data, seeing what has happened in the past, and what was the why behind some of your data. But when you talk about some of the predictive capabilities, that's where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy. So, a lot of you probably know that we do integrate with, certain, data science, predictive analytics programming languages like R or Python. But the barrier to entry is pretty steep into those types of things. It's going to require you to know some coding language, and then you're going to have to get familiar with some of the syntax that Tableau uses to actually interact with, your Python or your R script. And then we've got some basic analytics capabilities if you go to our analytics tab here, but sometimes those aren't just enough. So in 2020.4, we did introduce a couple of predictive modeling functions. So we've got model percentile, model quantile, just for time purposes, and just for I think model quantile is just a little bit easier to wrap your head around. Model percentile is just a little bit different, but so let's say, for example, that we want to let's say just predict sales. So the first thing that I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and drop order date up here to columns. I'll go ahead and change this to a continuous variable month, and then I'll go ahead and drag out sales here. So we can look down here and we can see that our data ends in December 2021. This is not actually using the predictive function. That's just when this Superstore data set goes until. And I want to predict that out into the future here. So what I'm going to do is create a calculated field, and I'm going to use our model quantile function here. I'm going to call this sales prediction. And what we want to do here is really take a long look at the syntax and the help on these functions here. So the first thing that it's going to ask us to do here is a quantile. So you've got some choices here. I'm going to go ahead and just do 0.5. This is basically just saying, hey, I want the median prediction value here. So if you wanted to do something like a band, like seeing 90th percentile or 10 percentile, you could play around with this number, but most common, you're probably going to want to use something like 0.5. Don't worry about this too much at this point. If you get deep into this, we've got some really good documentation on this. And so the next parameter that it's going to ask us for is this target expression. So what do we want to predict here? What we want to do is predict our sum of sales. And then the next piece here is going to be our predictor expression. So, what are the variables that we want to use to predict sales? So we'll just do a simple example here. I'll just go ahead and do, we just want to, maybe look at our month here. I'm going to do a date trunk. I'll do month and order date. Something to be aware of, you will want to wrap your dimensions in a ATTR function. And then at this point, we've got, let me just make a quick correction here. And we should be good. Okay, so we've got our parameters in here. We've got our sales prediction. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And I'm going to drag our newly created calculated field, our sales predictions, onto our rows. And you can see this is our prediction down here. So we can make this a little bit easier to read here if I just go to dual axis, and then I'll go ahead and synchronize the axis. So now I've got my actual sales values along with my prediction here. And so some of you at this point might be thinking, okay, you've just been talking about, predictive analytics. We want to think about what is going on, what is going to happen in the future. This doesn't do us, a ton of good at this point. I mean, we could, evaluate our model at this point, but if we can't predict anything in the future, it may not be all that useful to us. And that's where extending this date axis is going to really help us out. So if we go up here to our month order date till, what you'll notice here is we can extend the date range. So watch what happens when I extend this by another 3 months. We don't have any actual values after December of 21, but our prediction continues on into the future. So that's one of our predictive models that you can use. And now within that specific function here, this model quantile, look what happens when I click right at the beginning of this in our helper here. We do have some alternate kind of syntax here. So we can actually specify a specific model. So by default, this is going to be a linear model, but we do have some other options. So for example, if we wanted to use, let me just pull up our help documentation here, choosing a predictive model. So linear regression is going to be our default here. But if we wanted to use regularized linear regression, we could do that by specifying model equals RL. If we wanted to use Gaussian process, we could do that as well, simply by putting this model equals GP. And we do go into a little bit of detail on what the differences between these models are. So check this out afterwards. I'll include it in some of the content that I send out afterwards. So if I go over here and I change this, it's important to actually put this in double quotes. Let's go ahead and do model GP, put a comma here, and I'll go ahead and click OK. And you will see that the model updates. So this looks like it fits a lot better given the data that we have. So you've got a few options here that you can play around with. Predictive models, again, in Tableau Desktop. If you want to learn more and want to know maybe some more use cases, check out Tableau Public using this predictive modeling functions search here. You'll get a number of other use cases related to these functions that are available. Next item that I want to call out here, I'm going to move through this pretty quick. Looks like we got about 9 minutes left. Map layers. So starting in 2020.4, you can add additional dimensions to your map. So let's start with something pretty simple here. Let's just do state and profit. I'll go ahead and take advantage of show me. And now let's say, okay, now I've identified, the state of Ohio, Texas, they're struggling with their profits. I want to go a level deeper. Maybe I want to see if there's a specific city that's being impacted. So when I drag city over here, you'll notice I've got this add a marks layer. So when I click or drop city onto that marks layer, you'll notice it adds city onto the shelf here. And now we can play around with this on this specific shelf. So maybe at this point, I want to drag in, profit ratio for cities. And now I've got multiple layers on my map. And you can continue to add other layers as well. And again, kind of the cool thing here is you've got full control over both city and state. So for example, if you wanted to, maybe change this to a specific shape like a diamond, you could do that. Changing the size here to make it stand out a bit. Maybe you want state to be, maybe a little bit lighter here so it draws more attention to your cities. You can do that as well. So map layers, really cool feature. Again, if you want to know some more good use cases here for map features, I would point you to Mark Reed's blog, so dataviz.blog. He's got some awesome stuff on maps, spatial analysis, really cool stuff. When I'm looking for inspiration with maps, this is the spot that I will definitely frequent. Okay, so jumping over to 21.1, only going to call out one thing for this release. There's obviously quite a few others, but dashboard extensions. So dashboard extensions are really, small applications, you could say, that are an extension of the Tableau product. And some of these can be really beneficial. So I'll show you how these work. So let's say we've got a basic Superstore dashboard right here. So one thing that you will notice is you now have a new object when you are building out a dashboard called an extension. You used to be able to do this. It was just a slightly different experience, pretty clunky to be honest. You would have to download a certain file and get that to your dashboard. Now it's just much easier. You can just simply drag an extension anywhere on your canvas here. I'll go ahead and drop this one over filters. And so you're given this nice clean interface with all of the extensions that you have available. So for most folks, maybe you don't want to pay for a new extension. So you are given the ability to filter out some of these. So you could, filter on just the free extensions. Maybe you just want extensions that are actually built by Tableau and Salesforce that are sandboxed. For those of you that aren't aware, a sandbox extension is really an extension that is hosted on Tableau's hardware. So really one, I guess, caveat to call out here, anytime you are dealing with extensions, you are going to want to get your Tableau server admin, potentially your security team involved, just to make sure that everything is fine. You're not going to cause any security risks to your company. So, if you're using an extension that's built by a third party, again, you just want to be aware of, what information is being exchanged. So always a good idea, get your Tableau server admin involved, make sure that you're doing everything correctly before you dive into these. So just a lot of nifty little features in here. One that's pretty simple here is this filter bookmarks. When you click on an extension, you'll get some nice documentation on what that feature is. For this one specifically, it's just a nice button to reset some of your filters. So I'll just go ahead and add this one to my dashboard. I don't have to do any more installing. This is all just ready to go here. And maybe I want this button, when someone clicks it, to always filter my data to the current year. So I'll go ahead and just call this current year, save the settings, click OK. So now at this point, it's not really doing anything, but let's say I, change this to the current year, 1/1/2021, and I go back up to my extension here. I'll go to configure. And basically what it's asking me to do is it's basically going to remember whatever filter I have selected at this point, and it's going to save those anytime I hit that button. So I'll go ahead and click on Save Settings. I'll just revert this filter, maybe click on Central. So now anytime someone clicks this button here, it's going to filter all of my data to that current year. So just kind of a nice little feature that you can do, and there's plenty of those out there that you guys can take a look at. So jumping over to Ask Data, 2021.2. Couple things I'll call out here: Ask Data, specifically lenses, and then the ability to show hide buttons for any object. So previously, I'll go ahead and actually just show that one right now. You could only hide a floating container. So what I mean by that is previously, if we did, we're on a dashboard here, I go to floating, I fire off one of these containers here, and I could put a sheet inside this container, and I could add a nice add show hide button. But now with any object in Tableau, you are now given that same ability here. So if I click on any one of these sheets here, you'll now see that you can add that add show hide button. And I'll show that really here in just a second. But the one thing I want to focus on here is Ask Data. So previously, what you would do if you wanted to take advantage of Ask Data, you would need to actually go, you would be in Tableau Online, and you would click on the Ask Data tab at the very top toolbar. Now you can actually embed Ask Data into your visualization here. So if I just drag this out, what you are going to notice here is it's going to tell me to configure Ask Data. You need to actually edit this dashboard in your online or your Tableau server environment. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll jump over to Tableau Online here, and I'll go into Ask Data. I'll go ahead and jump into web editing mode. And now I've got Ask Data down here. I'll go ahead and float this in. And I'll drag it across the screen here. And so now it's going to ask me, choose a lens essentially. So this is new for 21.2. Now, instead of giving your users access to the entire underlying data set, you can now actually condense those into nice consumable objects called lenses. I really like this feature. I think it's really beneficial in the natural language world, because what that allows you to do is you can take a very complicated data set where maybe your users have gone in, they've tried to do Ask Data, but it's just not working all that well. You can actually create a lens that maybe only includes, maybe 3 dimensions and 2 measures. Well, Ask Data is very likely to work a lot better on just a small number of dimensions than it is with a huge amount of dimensions and measures where it's trying to figure out what you're actually trying to ask. So a lens is just a great way to consolidate some of your data and really narrow it down to specific questions that your end users might be interested. I'm not sure what is going on here. Looks like a small error. I'm going to go over to hopefully my finished product here. And we'll go ahead and use that lens. So essentially, this is where you're going to be able to do that natural language querying. Again, this is the entire Superstore data set, but I've narrowed it down here to just a few dimensions and measures. So your users can just start clicking around and asking and answering their own questions, going beyond the dashboard. And I really think that, with Ask Data lenses, you've got navigation buttons, you've got add, show, containers, or objects essentially. Your excuses for really cluttering your dashboard now with every piece of information you possibly can, those excuses are really minimal now, because you can do a lot of different things with those specific features to keep your dashboard simple, but be able to allow your users to still ask and answer really any question that they can think of on their dashboard. So with that, I do want to call out, we did drop 21.3. Just know we've got personal spaces now available on your Tableau server. So those are what they sound like. So instead of having your own folder, if you just want content just specific to you, you can drop that in your personal space, and then custom samples if you want to include a template like Chantilly talked about earlier. You can have those pop up right when you open up Tableau Desktop. So I will stop there. I know I'm 2 minutes over. I'll pass it back over to you, Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin. So yeah, that's great. There's so much stuff here. We do have a couple questions for anybody that has to leave. Thanks for joining. Appreciate your time. Hope you had a good session. But we do have some questions for you, Colin. So how do administrators see users' personal spaces?
Did you say how do the administrators use them?
Yeah.
Yep. So, to be totally honest, I haven't dove in real deep with this, but from my understanding, everyone is given a personal space from creator to explorer, and then you are able to actually set the storage limit on a personal space. So to my knowledge, those are that restriction on storage is really the only option. I'm not sure if you can turn it off and on completely. I can check into that. But I do know you have the ability as an admin to limit the amount of content that you can put in a user's personal space.
Awesome. Another question from Renee. We're implementing 2021.1.3 in a couple months. My company does not purchase any additional features. I'm trying to locate what's in Service Pack 1 since we still do not have those features. I'm assuming this is for the add-ons instead. So I think everything that you've shown is base product, not part of the add-ons, right?
Correct. Everything in this has been standard Tableau. Nothing here is add-on specific.
Okay, awesome. We did have the question, I think we marked it as answered, about the data analyst. Were you going to go over that, Colin? I know a little bit about it too, if you'd prefer me to talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I caught that one. So yeah, if you want to take it, Zach, fire away.
Yeah, so I think somebody asked about it before. It's still in beta right now. So if you're not familiar, Tableau just changed all of their certification program. The professional certifications for desktop and server have been retired. The associates are still there, but they're kind of there's a foundation around a data analyst certification now, and that being kind of the main area of certification going forward. Like I said, it's in beta right now. I think it's $200. Part of this, the two main differences that I've heard and I've seen about this is it's not necessarily specific to a tool anymore. So it's really, the Tableau products. So Tableau desktop, a little bit about prep, some about server, and the whole stack a little bit more. And also it is not an open book exam anymore. So you're not able to get on Google and search things like you have in the past or anything like that. So it's a little bit more strict. It's going through Pearson now. So yeah, you can find information if you look up data analyst certification for Tableau on Tableau's website. Any other questions for Colin or anything else before we drop?
Perfect. Thanks everyone for attending. I know there were some issues at the beginning with the link. We are going to set up a meeting with Tableau to hopefully get that sorted out. So next time, fingers crossed, we do not occur any issues. If we do, please make sure you're a part of the Columbus Tableau user group LinkedIn page. If not, feel free to jot down myself or Zach's information. And at the start of a meeting, if you're having any issues, email us directly and we can send that link out to you. Again, thank you all for joining and appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Lee.